Today, we are diving into a topic that feels very personal. We are going to be talking about body image issues that we, especially we as women, experience. I recently did a poll on my Instagram, and 8 out of 10 women said that they got the message, they received the message that their bodies were inherently wrong or bad. They were too much, they were not enough, or that they were just meant to be hidden always. And that is affecting us now as adults. So we are going to be diving into body image today and how we are untangling those stories that we have told ourselves for our lives. Welcome to the Connection Codes podcast. This is the podcast where we break open our emotions that take us from being disconnected to connected in our relationships and in ourselves. I am your host, Tira Wages, and joining me is marriage and family therapist, clinical sexologist, Dr. Glenn Hill, and his incredible wife, Phyllis, where together they have founded the Connection Codes, which is the guide to human connection. And we're so glad you're here.
Yes. Hello, world.
Hi, friends. Well, so often I think people ask, how do you end up choosing your topics? And often it's because of conversations that we have before we do the podcast. And then with this, particularly, Tira was sharing that she had done a poll on her Instagram. And so that's kind of what brought this up specifically today.
Yeah.
And then I was sharing with Tira that Glenn and I spoke to a group recently where actually we were talking about this. And specifically with that, we were diving more into marriage and sex, but that is at such a foundational part and piece to so much of it because of the messaging that we have heard at some point in our lives.
Right.
And so, give us some of your thoughts as far as where you were thinking of going with
can
that.
I interject real quickly? Because I just love what you just said, the messages that you've received. And I get it, Tira, we talk that way culturally, but you said something about the I don't remember if you said the stories, the lies that we tell ourselves, but I just shy away from that active verbiage because I don't think we tell ourselves that. I think we've heard that message and it gets repeated in a loop over and over again. It's not an active, somebody got up in the morning and said, what lie am I going to tell myself today? And I think it helps sometimes if we can approach it that way that, I've been given this message. I didn't make this up.
Yeah.
I received this from somebody and now it's stuck in a loop over and over again. And I also want to mention too, and I'm not willing to argue about hardly any of this, but I'm fascinated with the difference that we have experienced, and every human's unique, and there's people on all points of the spectrum, but the difference between our son, we have 3 daughters and 1 son, and our son was very, very different as far as body image. He was certain that everybody in the house wanted to see him naked as often as possible.
Yeah.
I'm not talking about when he was 2. I'm talking about when he was 6, 8, 10, 12, and our daughters. And, we don't know is how do you figure out the ingredients that led to that? Did we affect them? I guess. I'm not sure. But especially our 2 older daughters were far, far more, what would you call it?
Modest is the word.
Modest,
Private.
perhaps shy, at least
Shy,
private. Yeah. And our son just wasn't. Did we affect that? I guess. I don't know. I can't prove or disprove that. But it is fascinating. It was fascinating for us just to observe the difference that our son was just certain that we wanted to see running around the house.
Well,
naked.
it's interesting because, Terry, you were saying that this applies more towards women. And I think probably culturally that is true. But I also know that many men struggle with their body image.
Totally. Yeah.
And it's one of those where it's almost, I wonder sometimes if it's harder for them because they don't talk about it because it's not what's talked about.
Yeah.
Where I think now, especially culturally, the topic of among women of body image is out on the table.
Definitely.
You go to women's events even, and that could be a topic. Where I doubt there's ever a guy event where anyone is talking about the struggle of their body image. and how that plays out and how they view themselves, how they, function in life, and just that, the messaging.
Totally. While I completely agree with that, I think that it is also a huge part of the problem because we as women, for me, in my experience, a lot of the messaging I received about my body came from men.
Right.
And so if we're coming together now as adults, as women, and we are talking about our body image, we're essentially trying to like put Neosporin on it to like heal the scars, put Band-Aids over it to cover it up. But if we can't get these conversations happening with our husbands, with our sons, then the cycles are just going to continue to repeat and repeat and repeat. And while I absolutely do know that lots of men have body image issues for sure, and in no way am I trying to make that small for them. I think the expectation of how women show up in the world, especially sexually, how much it affects us. And so we're married to these men who are like, touch yourself, take your clothes off in front of me, be this like sexual goddess being and show me your body. This same body that so many men before me have come and criticized, whether it was in person or through television or from the pulpit. And so to untangle these things, we as women cannot carry that burden alone to do that for ourselves.
Yeah. And I do think it's a distinct minority as far as men, and that'd be interesting to do the same poll and see what your percentages are. I do think it would be a much lower percentage. And just culturally, we were just with some extended family members this past weekend, and my favorite uncle, and he passed away several years ago, but I remember him growing up, and he had a huge gut, and he'd just take his shirt off and walk around. And again, this is back when I'm 5, 6, 8, 10 years old. I just remember being fascinated by that there seemed to be nothing within him, no embarrassment, no shame, whatever, which again, I'm not trying to get him to feel shame. I'm just fascinated because I think typically, and again, there are exceptions to that, but I think typically women are far more aware that, and I've said to Phyllis before, especially when I see a guy out in public who I'm thinking, whoa, and you may judge me for this, audience, but I'll say to her, I wish I had that self-confidence.
Yeah.
I mean, this dude, his stomach is hanging 8 inches over his belt, and he's like, what? I didn't. And I think typically that is more common with men, that they're just, they either don't care or are not aware or think, I don't know, because I'm not like that. I think I'm in that distinct minority of men in this culture. So I'm just fascinated by that.
Well, and that's even an interesting way to start this whole thing, because I think I've always been aware of how aware of the body image you are of yourself, like very critical of yourself in the sense of, I think you, and we've been together a really long time. So I met you as a teenager, and you were very, very, very skinny, but you thought you were fat. So there was a body image problem right there, right?
Yeah.
And so, that's part of my story. And I've always had, my girls have always said, Mom, you've always had such great confidence in your body. Yeah. Where did that come from? And, I'm not sure, because I grew up definitely hearing messages. Now, many of you know I grew up in Germany. So prior to moving to the States, I don't know that I heard negative body messages. I remember growing up in Germany that it was so common to go to the park in the summer, and women were topless laying out to get their sun, right?
Yeah.
And women didn't shave their legs or their armpits. Like, it was such a different culture.
Right.
And then we came to the States, and all of a sudden, I, as a teenager, had to learn all the rules. And all of a sudden, I'm hearing that it's my fault if a boy lusts. And I'm like, I'm sorry, what? Like, because of growing up in Europe, it's like, wait, that was never connected to a woman at the park laying out topless. Or, women rarely, I think, that I see, especially younger women in Europe, wearing a bra back in the 60s. It's like, so I never heard of messaging back then
Yeah.
that if a man lusts, it's your fault because you're not wearing a bra. It was like, that wasn't even a thing.
Yeah.
And I remember too, just in an interesting way, so much of advertising, like we would see giant billboards advertising deodorant and the woman was completely naked because
Yeah.
of course you put on your deodorant before you put on your clothes kind of idea.
Yeah.
And nobody was gawking at it. Nobody was talking about it. It was just an advertisement. And so when I came to the States, it all changed. And then I started hearing this idea that, and this was, of course, mostly in youth group messages where it was all of a sudden our fault. And, it was all of a sudden based on what you wore, based on, those kinds of things. And so it was a real shift into, I think, for me, all of a sudden it was so clear that I was I was shamed if I was celebrating my body. Like
Right.
I was shamed if it was always about how short are your skirts, how short are your shorts, how much, cleavage are you showing? Spaghetti straps were not okay.
Oh, for sure.
And,
they had to be at least an inch thick.
So sorry, Terry.
I know. I'm
you're
rebelling. I'm working on rebelling against myself.
Okay,
honestly.
You're wearing spaghetti straps
Yeah.
today for those of you who can't see her. But it's like all of a sudden all of that changed, which was very, I guess, confusing to me, except everything was confusing coming from, I had to learn English. So I was pretty challenged with, I could speak English. I just couldn't read or write it when we moved back to the States. So I was behind on a lot of things, but I know that by the time I married Glenn, I had conformed to all those messages.
Yeah.
And so the idea of being naked in front of him was like, are you kidding? That I didn't know how to change. I didn't know how to turn the switch to change from, I'm supposed to now celebrate it and, I'm supposed to be okay being naked. But yet for all these years now, through my teenage years in America, I've learned no, 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 no.
Yeah.
And so it was very difficult, the idea of switching it and being now all of a sudden into the, let me celebrate and,
Totally.
be free in front of you.
Yeah. Well, even, I think those are really good points that you make about different cultures, like women in Africa walking around just nursing their babies openly. And it's not a thing, but somehow in our American culture, we have very much made women's bodies a thing, and I think that message has created, like, it's not even our bodies that create the lust in men, I would say. It's the message that their bodies are creating lust in you that creates more lust in men. Like, to know that you could have billboards of completely naked women in Europe and men could walk down the street and be okay. They could function in society and not just have to jump into a bathroom somewhere. But here, suddenly, if they see 3 inches of cleavage, that's a lot. Even an inch of it, suddenly it's like, oh no, now they're lusting. I think you just told them that that's what they're supposed to do. I think that you are also giving men the message that when you see women's bodies in this way, this is how you are supposed to react to it. So we're training this in the same way we're training women to hide. We're training men to become even more aware of it, which is creating this horrible cycle in our culture. And I think you talked about your daughters being more modest than your son. And where did they get that message? How did they get that message? But it's really interesting because I live in a neighborhood of a bunch of boys. At any given day, I have 9 boys in my home. And I have a daughter, and then there's a 3-year-old girl across the street. And that's it. Those are our girls. And our boys all take their shirts off, especially now it's summer. They take off their shirts, they run around. And this 3-year-old girl asks repeatedly, can I take off my shirt? Can I take off my dress? And the answer has always been no. No, you can't. No, leave it on. Put your shirt back on. And her parents aren't doing anything wrong. Like, I'm not criticizing their parenting. And at one point I was with the dad who's like, I don't know how to respond to this. Like, I don't know how to navigate this conversation because the rules are different for her.
Yeah.
And she's 3. So even now she's getting the message, you are different than them and you can't have as much fun than them and you need to hide yourself where they don't have to hide themselves. Right. And so I think even as little bitty girls, our parents unintentionally give us that message without even realizing they're giving us the message. Yeah. And actually last week, the mom finally, the girl probably asked 4 times just in the time we were having a conversation. The mom was like, you know what? Today you can, today you're going to be allowed to. Just let me get through this conversation, And the little girl just like lit up. Like, I get to be a normal kid, like every other kid I hang out with, every other kid. And so I just think it's really, really fascinating how and when we get those messages and why they're there to begin with. I started receiving the message when I was in 7th grade, and it was from boys at school who would openly talk about my body in front of groups of people. They were criticizing my body. They were teasing me. And I know that I'm not alone in that. And this continued all through high school and through college. Wow. And I had no voice. I had no idea that I could say, don't talk about me like that. Like I wanted to be cool. I wanted to be liked. I didn't want to cause trouble. And so I had multiple guys on various occasions be very vocal about me publicly. And then they would touch me as well. And so they would make fun of my body. And then when they had the opportunity to hug me a little long and wrap their arm all the way around me, they took advantage of it. And this went on and on. If they could touch my butt, if they could pinch my butt, they would. And it wasn't until I met Wes Wages. He was the first man to not talk about my body. Wow. And he asked at least 2 men, and at this point we were in our 20s, so like I'll call them men, to never touch me again. Wow. Yeah. And that was my very first experience of a man showing me bodily respect. Wow. Which is why I fell in love with him so hard. But it's just interesting that how that affected me for so long, and that as a woman, I didn't know that I could say any different. And that now I've been married to this man for 15 years, this first man to show me love and respect. Like I was begging him to kiss me. He was like, no, let's wait. I begged him to sleep in the bed with me before we got married. He didn't. He was like full on respect of me and my body. And now all of the messaging I received before him is affecting him in our relationship. Wow. And I think that is so common. Yeah. And so I'm trying to unwind this narrative that I have. And there's millennials and Gen Z have like these summer phrases that they use. One of the big ones is like, this is my hot girl summer. Have y'all seen that? Like, no. Oh yeah, it's like hashtag like hot girl summer and things like that. And so a lot of girls on social media will claim whatever their summer is of like, this is my lay in bed and do nothing summer or whatever. And I'm like, this is my summer of learning to love and respect my body again. Wow. And not view it as something that is damaged or bad or should be hidden. Yeah. And so I wore a backless dress recently. Wow. Yeah, it was a huge deal for me. Massive, massive deal for me. And it's like I'm trying to reclaim my body as mine. Right. And no one else's. Like not even Wes's. My body is not his. Yeah. But I share it with him, Yeah. And so I think it's really interesting that we as women at some point in our life, if we want to change the trajectory of our sex life and how we show up in the world and our confidence, we have to intentionally change our identity around these topics. Yeah. And I don't think that's an easy thing, Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm not exactly sure how to even go about that.
Yeah. And that's just kind of a side note, but I was really fascinated the first time I went to Europe with Phyllis and her family. And I remember the first time we walked into it was some sort of big, I think it was a mall, and there was a huge poster. I mean, gracious, probably, who knows, 20, 30 feet high, and it was a completely nude woman. It was advertising deodorant. And growing up, I mean, I was a farm boy, from rural South Carolina, and I remember seeing that, and it just rushed in on me, and I thought, oh my gosh, there's going to be guys lining up to masturbate in front of this. And then I look around, and again, this just all happened in split seconds, and nobody's even noticing.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, I just didn't understand it. It didn't make sense to me, because the message I'd always gotten was that if there was nudity, there's going to be 15 guys standing around masturbating, and there wasn't. And that took I think years for me to even be able to digest and figure out how can that be? Because the message was very clear to me growing up that is what would happen. And seeing that, and I can't believe nobody prepped us or prepped me for any of that, because I didn't know that was going to be a thing. Because I remember initially, again, in a split second, thinking, I bet nobody knows that poster's been put up. And then I'm like, wait, it's a freaking 20, 30 foot tall. Somebody put it up there. It's not like a big surprise. And it just didn't make sense to me. I had no concept of how they could have gotten away with that. I didn't know who they was, and I didn't know who they were getting away with it from. But I was like, this is a scandal. And it wasn't. It's just
Way of life.
basically no big deal culturally.
Yeah.
We just recently talked to a group, and this topic, came up. And part of what we were kind of breaking down, how as women, we have to learn to show up in our bodies. And, at first when you say that, you're like, what does that mean? Well, and, it kind of goes back, I've got to love my body.
Yeah.
And what we were talking about is specifically in sex, that it's easier for us as women just to show up as a product, to show up and perform.
Yeah.
And for many of us, we've done that so long, we're pretty proud of ourselves. Like, well,
We did it.
Yeah, we did it,
Check.
and check mark. And then when we start talking about the pleasure that we are supposed to be having, that is sometimes where the canyon is so wide of like, wait, I know how to perform. I know how to be the product in my marriage, but now you want me to, it's such a huge shift. You want me now to actually love this and enjoy this, and it be about me, and how in the world do I show up in my body? And I think one thing to realize is that's quite the journey. Like, just think of it as a canyon, because you definitely can't just do it during sex. Like, okay, we're having sex. I'm gonna show up. I'm gonna show up. I'm gonna show up. It's like, ooh, you got to learn to show up long before that moment. And we were teaching this with a group, but then we were in session with a couple. And I thought Glenn made such a great point, because when there is conflict during the day, there's so much wounding. And I love, even the when you think about that, emotional and physical, like the pain is not distinguished in the brain. So if Glenn says something unkind to me, he might as well just go ahead and hit me with a ice pick, he always calls it. Because then you would see the wound.
Right.
Where when it's an emotional wound, it's like no one sees it. He doesn't see it. And if I don't say, ow, if I don't say, wow, I feel really hurt that you just said that, then I just carry that inside my body.
Yeah.
And then, let's say that happened at 8:00 that morning. Then, he leaves for the day. And then at 8:00 at night, he's all interested in my body.
Yeah.
Well, I'm still carrying that wound. My arm is still bleeding, but nobody sees that because it's an emotional wound.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons we stress that. And I think analogies can help us so much to get the difference between the physical and the emotional, because the brain doesn't distinguish that. So, 3 times a day, 4 times a day, whatever, I stomped on Phyllis's foot, I kicked her in the shin, I stabbed her in the shoulder with an ice pick, and I punched her in the face. And then at 7 o'clock at night, I'm like, hey, babe, let's dance sexually. She's wounded. She is so harmed. And this can very, very much be vice versa, but I think it's typically far more the male to the female. And then he doesn't understand why she's just so frigid and why she's so uninterested. And I guess she just doesn't find me attractive anymore. Well, in one sense, that's true, because she is so wounded by what happened during the day. And that wounding is still there. It does not go away just because, it's 7 o'clock at night. And if she is not able to process that, and again, it's some vice versa, but if she's not able to process that, that is going to stay long term. And I believe that adds to, for most women, just based on my experience as a clinician, most women are already behind the game, behind the curve, going into their relationship as far as physicality, sexuality. Then they experience these woundings with their partner. Now, the odds of anything good happening are very, very small.
Well, I think that's how sometimes we can end up just being the product and performing because we know, yes, I've been wounded all day long, but if we don't do this, then I'll pay for it tomorrow. And so it goes back to detaching ourselves from our body.
Yeah.
And then it's like, so even that's going on. And, with the idea of body image, it's like, wow, where am I on all of this? Am I detaching from my body? Am I just using my body as a product? Or am I really embracing my body? Am I really friends with my body?
Yeah. And I love that you used the analogy, both of you talking about how the emotional wounds, if we could see them physically, and if you don't process them, how that wound would still be there. And so I think when it comes to body image and then showing up sexually for our husbands or our partners, whether it's male or female, so essentially, because I have body image issues and my body was publicly criticized multiple times, those ice picks happened in my most private parts, in the parts of me that are hidden. And now my husband wants me to take it all off, but I have scars there. And now you want me to enjoy this body that is essentially feels damaged from the emotional wounds that you can't see. So I want husbands, if your wife especially is someone that experiences body image issues, like picture her naked with scratches all over her chest, with scratches all over her butt from times that men touched her inappropriately, pinched her butt as she walked by, slapped her on the butt. Imagine she has scars all over the places of her body, and now you want her because you desire her, you love her. You can't see those scars normally, so you don't know they're there, but you want her to show up in this like glorious being and perform is not the word, but like connect with you deeply, despite those wounds. And if those wounds haven't been processed, a lot of them may still be open. So now when you are connecting sexually, that pain, while it's emotional, it might as well be physical. She can physically feel that pain. And so I think that part of this process is for her and for you, if it's the man experiencing these pains, to process. And we've talked about this before, and I've read it in other places as well, but telling our stories helps heal our brain. And that's why we do the wheel, because we need to vocalize, we need to physically say what has happened to us so our brains can begin to heal itself. And so I think creating space especially where you would spend time being sexual with each other, because I know you got families and you're like, I ain't got much time, but instead of just going straight into taking the clothes off, instead create that time and just let her or him process that pain and have specific conversations of tell me your stories. What message about your body did you receive as a kid? Okay. And not to try to fix it, not, anything like that. But then after, and it may take time because I have a lot of stories that, and some of them have just been coming up more recently. And one of them is so painful for me. I think I've only told Wes one time in passing, and we've been married 15 years. And it's still very much inside my body. And let her begin to get that out. And then you can also understand maybe why she's showing up the way she is. It actually has nothing to do with you.
Right.
You think, oh, she doesn't desire me. You think she doesn't want me, or she's not sexual, or she doesn't like it. No, it's because she has open sores on her chest. And then as you process, you can do a issue-specific core emotion wheel. You can have, just write down all the stories, because I could do a wheel on multiple different stories that I have. But let her get all of those stories out. And then someone recommended the next part of reframing who we are to ourselves. So then you can tell her, this is how I see you. And then have her repeat it every single day. You repeat it every single day, because again, our words carry such power. So if I'm looking in the mirror and I'm saying, ugh, this part of my body is too big, well, I'm saying that over and over again versus looking in the mirror and saying, no, I am beautifully and wonderfully made. My husband thinks that this part of me is fire.
Yeah.
And if we can say those stories out loud over and over again, we can train our brain to believe those things.
Yeah, and that's the reason in the late night masterclass that the very first experience assignment is a issue-specific core emotion wheel about sexuality. And I never say 100% with human behavior, but I think every couple I've ever talked to, and again, it can be vice versa, but he learned a ton about what was happening with her that he had no idea, that she feels so much fear with him. Not necessarily because of him. This could have existed long before they even met. But when she even contemplates the idea of being involved sexually with her partner, she's overwhelmed with fear.
Yeah.
And he didn't know that. And she's been going for who knows what, a year, 5 years, 10, 20 years, and never told him that. And so to get them to the processing stage, that because this isn't going away. Yeah. And that's something, and I love the way Phyllis talks about that people be like, well, okay, if the negative emotions are there, fine. I just don't want to talk about them. Well, we don't get that option.
Yeah.
It's just not any more so than if you stepped on a nail and you have a nail in your foot and you go, well, I just don't want to talk about it. Okay, that does not change the fact that you have a nail in your foot. It is there. And if you don't do something about it, it's going to get worse, gangrene, whatever. So anyway, to get people to process through the emotions, and again, whoever it is, whichever partner, but to get them to process through what's happening with them around sexuality. And we just start there, and then we can expand it. And you don't do that one time.
Yeah.
You may need to do, again, literally 50 issue-specific core emotion wheels about sexuality, what happens for you.
I think the other thing, too, as we draw to an end, is understanding the misunderstanding about body image. I think people go, oh, she's perfect body-wise, so she has great body image. And that is not true. And it is, I love, even as painful as it is, Tira, and I appreciate you sharing it, to think about all the scars on her body that we don't see.
Yeah.
And so she doesn't experience a perfect body.
Yeah.
We are looking at it based on the standards and based on the standards of the country we live in.
Yeah.
Because in some countries, and of course it has changed over the centuries, like even, because I'm always amazed when you read older manuscripts, and when women had extra poundage, that meant they were well-fed and wealthy, and that was admired, where skinny women were, that was not beautiful at all. That was like, because you're so poor, and that was looked down upon. And now we live in a time when, the skinnier the better, or something. I don't know. We just have this skewed thing, but body image is not, and I've always been amazed at that I've learned that over the years of being married, that just because what I see is this perfect body, that doesn't mean she has a great body image. And I think it gets back to what's happening on the inside.
Yeah.
And, it's almost like for us to be able to go, how can I create safety in my body? And I love what you said, just practically, like telling the stories, addressing the scars that you have on your body and that only you can see, because they're not physical scars.
Yeah.
They're emotional scars. And then also, I love the fact, like, recently you wore a backless dress because for you, it was a statement of, I want to celebrate this, and I want to do this to show my celebration of this. And I think there are steps. It's like, what would it take for you to feel safe within your body?
Yeah.
And to realize it's super important to start there, because it all goes back to how God created us to enjoy sex. We actually, on this thing this group we were teaching with, somehow it got mentioned, even the idea that the way women are created and that we can have multiple orgasms. And most people don't know that. And it leads to questions, right? And when we're teaching in a group, and like, yeah, tell us more about that. How do we get there?
We're just trying to have one. You
Yeah,
know?
exactly. But in this group, it was the husband who said, yeah, I want to learn more about that. Like, how can I help my wife have multiple? And there's so much layers to all of that.
Yeah.
Like, we feel guilt that we take so long.
Yeah.
There's so much happening in our brains that is affecting our bodies.
Yeah.
And to me, it starts here. It's like, are you feeling safe in your body? Or are you even betraying your body? Like, are you just showing up as a product? Are you just showing up to perform? And you've done it very well, and you think, well, this is, it's my duty. So this is what I'm supposed to do. And it's like to learn that, no, that is really not true.
Yeah.
Then you got to start way back. You got to back way up and go, oh, well, I don't feel safe in my body. I don't celebrate my body.
Yeah.
There's way too much shame. And, then you got to go back to, what were the early messaging? Was it, you mentioned different places you might have heard it, but you are sharing so specifically memories of boys disrespecting your body.
Yeah.
Thinking they had the right to pinch you on the butt or to criticize your body in front of a group of people. And you silently stood by because you didn't know you had a voice.
Yeah.
And so there is so much wounding and all that then, yes, you go into marriage and your husband's like, yay, we're married. Let's just be naked all the time.
Yeah.
And it's like, that's not the reality too
100%.
often.
Yep.
So I love that. I love what you've shared, and just that I really do just, pray that this is a topic this podcast will open this topic up for a lot of people, whether you're married or not. I mean,
100%.
don't wait till you're married to have these conversations.
Definitely.
Like, ooh.
And I also want to acknowledge, I had a lot of women privately message that their entire life, they never felt like they were the right weight.
Right,
They received the message that whatever shape you were was wrong.
Yeah.
And so I want to acknowledge those women too, like, you are beautiful, like, take up space. And I think that that's another message that women get, is to stay small. And so that when our body doesn't fit that narrative, and I don't mean stay small physically, but we're just told in general, just like, nope, you sit over there, be quiet, stay small. And so then when we feel like our body isn't meeting even that message, it creates a whole nother layer. And so I love that Bridget Blood, who was on the podcast recently, she talked about, it was the connection codes that gave her permission to take up space. And so I want women to hear, like, take up space physically, mentally, emotionally. You deserve to be here, and we want you here. And your husband values that so much. So I encourage husbands to create that space for their spouse. And to create time to share these stories. And for women, And I hope that you feel safe enough with your partner to be able to share these stories with him or her so you can begin to put your brain back together and rewrite that narrative for yourself.
Wow.
So good.
And so now we are going to go into our core emotion wheel, which is how we end every single episode that we do. And this is our tool that helps us to identify what those emotions are. That's the actual core goal, is for you to learn within yourself, oh, this is shame, this is fear.
Yeah.
Because when we do that, we can then process it and we connect with others through it. And so this will allows you to connect with your partner, with your best friend, through processing your emotions. So it heals your brain all at the same time. Multi-usage.
Yes.
Wow.
Hey,
Yeah.
what would you think about us doing the wheel
Ooh, I'd
today?
be down for that.
I was thinking the
Okay.
same thing.
Yeah.
Cool, cool.
Awesome. You want to start?
Oh, I can start. Yeah. I love that we actually have one today because I
Wow,
always
you'd
struggle.
think we would.
I feel anger that American culture has created this narrative. To hear what other countries, the freedom that they experience and they have, it's like, why did we do this to ourselves? How did we get here? And so I have so much anger that this is what we've created. I have shame. I've had shame within my own body my entire life, but now even leaning into this new narrative for myself, I have shame of like, oh, are people just going to think I'm vain? So even stepping into this, it's creating a different type of shame. I have guilt. I have guilt for Wes that he has to now deal with the repercussions of other people and that it's affected our own sex life when he himself has been nothing but this like beautiful companion to me.
Wow.
I have fear. I actually have more fear for my sons than I do my daughter because I have fear that they are going to be influenced in a way where they're going to create damage for women. Yeah, as much as I'm trying to rewrite that, but that they will be the source of pain for someone. I feel lonely just because all of this is lonely. You know, sharing the insides of yourself is a lonely place and the judgment that may come with that. So I feel lonely in that, even though I know so many of us experience it. I feel sad that so many women do experience this and that it has held us back sexually for so long. This thing that we're supposed to be enjoying, we experience so much pain around. I feel hurt that these things were said to me and that I've had to carry them around and that they have created, you know, messages in my brain that tell me these things. I feel hurt that happened. And I feel joy because I found a partner that not only respects me, but will stand up for me against his own friends, you know, to tell them to protect me. He is a protector of my heart and my body. And so I have, so much joy in that.
So good. So good. I think I have sadness that, I think from an early childhood, I wasn't protected. And so, you know, things were done to me. I experienced things that left a lot of scars
Yeah.
for sure. I feel anger in the fact, kind of same, that I wasn't protected. I was the youngest of 8. I had 7 older sisters and brothers that I never felt protected by. And what I mean by that is that, for one thing, they never talked to me about things that really matter.
Yeah.
Like things that we're talking about right now, or just even making me aware of what to be prepared for, what to look for, what to, you know, no, don't walk into that. There's danger there.
Yeah.
None of that. And then my parents, no conversations that ever taught me anything about sexuality or my body or anything like that. Anger that, yes, when I came back to the States, it was like all of a sudden there was these strong messages that, you know, it's my fault and it's my body's fault.
Yeah.
And that really shut down me for a long time. More current, I think my shame and guilt is that I at 60, I want so much to be healthy and strong and to be kind to my body.
Yeah.
And I feel guilt and shame that is such a struggle, that I so easily get derailed. I so easily, eat the things I shouldn't, kind of thing. Like, as in, I know what's healthy for my body. And I think I look ahead and I want to be strong in my 70s, 80s, and 90s. And I want to, I want to live to be 100, but I want to be very mobile and strong. But it's all about what I'm doing now. So I always feel that I come up short, feel guilt. I did do my stretches this morning, so I feel joy.
Yes.
There's my joy. I do feel joy that this morning I got up quietly before everyone else and did my stretches that I really need to do every single day.
Yeah.
So had a good morning already with that. Lonely. I think that it's interesting because when you were doing your wheel, I think I was thinking about mine at the very same time. So sorry about that. I don't know that I was oohing you very well because I was so thinking about mine.
Get that.
And I thought about lonely, that I believe as a child, I was very lonely in this area. And as a teenager, felt very lonely in this area. I didn't know who to talk to.
Yeah.
When I first got married, I didn't know who to talk to. I felt so shell shocked. And it was also not what I expected. And I didn't know how to feel safe in my own body and felt very lonely in that because I didn't know who to talk to. So did that cover them? Did I say hurt? I think so. I think it was all kind of the same. So mine was very issue specific.
Yeah. That was great. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
If you are experiencing this, if you're like, oh, this is me, how can I even begin to have this conversation with my husband, with my wife, with my partner? We have created masterclasses that will walk you through. And I know that y'all listen every week and you're like, oh, but I can do the core emotion wheel. That's all that I need. That's your tool. There is so much more because we have a whole identity piece. And what we're talking about today is our identities. It's what we identify as. And so there's so much more in those masterclasses that you cannot get just from listening to this podcast. And so those links will be in the show note. We have one, if you've not done our Foundations Masterclass, that is how you build the safety in your relationship so you can have these conversations. Because if you just dive in for this conversation and you don't already know how to build safety first, you will create more damage. And then we have a masterclass that is all about sex, where we talk about all of these topics and more, so you can have the sex life that you imagined and that you deserve. And so you can do the foundations, or you can bundle them both together, and you can find those in the show notes. I will tell you, they changed my life. And I did not create them, so I feel like I can say that,
Well, they changed our life.
They changed your life, but people know that they changed your life because you made it, I am here because of the change that happened in my life. And I want everyone to experience that. But I also want to say that if you are a victim of sexual assault and you're like, I have these body issues, but it is because of horrific acts and anything that happened to you where someone did something to you unwanted is a horrific act. So it doesn't mean that I think we all think, well, mine wasn't that bad. And there's no scale. And so if you are a victim of sexual assault in any way, you may need to do this work with a professional. And so I highly encourage you to reach out. I will also link to book a session with Dr. Glenn and Phyllis. If you want a woman there are options to book both of them together for you to process this with someone, because you should not have to do it alone. And you deserve to rewrite your story, to begin a fresh story of deep connection and safety in your body and in your marriage. And so I highly encourage you, share this episode with 3 friends. And I would say girlfriends, but share them with your husbands, share them with their friends, so they can also, that says, I'm invested in your marriage, in your body, in your relationship, by sharing this episode. And so as always, thank you so, so much for being here. We get on here and we share our vulnerability. We share our lives with you because
you need this.
You deserve this.
So let's do this.
Let's do this.